Hi gang, so since we started the book club videos, I've got a lot of comments about the best entry points into 40k novels. And yeah, there's a lot of places to start, so I'll probably end up making some videos for good entry points. But one of the biggest and most complex series is the HORUS Heresy. It's 54 books in total, and that's just the main ones, and like any novel series that long, they vary in quality. For me, the best HORUS Heresy novels have a few things in common. They have human point of view characters, or find a way to really humanize the Space Marine characters. I think the series often fails when the novels have to write Primarchs as point of view characters. It's hard to make them feel like demigods. They take concepts from 40k that might be a bit silly or barely fleshed out, and they make them into convincing, believable cultures. And finally, they expand the world of the Great Crusade and present a world that feels, well, obviously different to the one of 40k. So in this video, I'm going to quickly go through all of them and rate them out of 5. Hopefully in about 20 minutes. I'll very briefly say what each book covers, which means there might be a few spoilers, but hopefully nothing worse than you'll get on the back of the book anyway. Okay, let's get going. Wonder why this series has lasted so long? Well, it starts out really well. HORUS Rising by Dan Abnett gives us a glimpse into the closing days of the Great Crusade and has everything I want from this series. We get some really interesting human characters with a variety of positions and opinions about the Crusade, and the Sons of Horus themselves are actually really likable. They get a solid, believable culture that doesn't rely on pulling from some historical period. We see a few Primarchs, but only from a distance, and the plot contains enough interesting hooks and Easter eggs to really get you involved. It's not the best book in the series, but HORUS Rising is a great start, and it gets 4.5 hairy Horuses. Book 2 is False Gods by Graham McNeill, and it's a direct sequel. In fact, the first 4 books in this series follow directly on from each other with most of the same characters. This gets us from Horus being wounded at Davin to the first stages of the rebellion, and we start to see the cracks in the Imperial system. The suppression of dissent, the way that the Astartes treat humans in a crisis. It's good, but it's not quite as interesting to me as HORUS Rising. 3 Lodge Priests. Book 3 is Galaxy in Flames by Ben Counter, and by this point the heresy's in full swing, and we see the events of Isstvan III where the 4 traitor legions purge their own ranks. Despite having some good moments, it's probably the weakest of the first 4 books. Necessary reading though, and it's pretty good. I give it 3 angry Rons. And the final in-sequence book is Flight of the Eisenstein by James Swallow, which switches point of view to the Death Guard as Captain Garrow assembles a band of renegades and escapes Isstvan III to warn the Imperium of Horus's betrayal. I think this book suffers a bit from having quite a lot of Astartes in the cast, and they're just not as interesting as the remembrances they're protecting, but it's good. 3.5 scary viruses. Lastly, closing out this initial arc is Fulgrim. It's not a direct sequel to the others in that it's mostly about the Emperor's children and it starts earlier in the Crusade, but it does cover the next big event, the drop site massacre on Isstvan V. Fulgrim is really good. It gets through loads of plot, and the fantastic human characters work as a really good foil for the horrible Astartes ones. 4 Doom Sirens. Right, this is where it all gets contentious. Book 6 is Descent of Angels by Mitchell Scanlon. This shows us pre-Imperial Caliban and the origins of the Dark Angels Legion from the point of view of 2 aspirants to a knightly order. Loads of people dislike this one as it's almost entirely set before the heresy, but I quite like it. It's exactly the sort of world building I enjoy. It's also the best Dark Angels novel in the series. I'm giving it 3 generic warp monsters. That's a big contrast to Book 7, which is probably one of the best Black Library books ever written. Legion by Dan Abnett, which introduces us to the Alpha Legion, the Cabal, and the Perpetuals, and some absolutely brilliant Imperial Army regiments. I really like this book. It does what the good heresy novels do best, takes a legion that didn't really have much to them and makes them a totally believable part of the world. It also expands on the Imperial Army through regiments like the Geno 5-2 or the Lucifer Blacks. In fact, the majority of the book is written from the point of view of regular army soldiers. It's absolutely one of the best of the series. 5 Hydra heads. And then Black Library dropped the ball with Book 8, Battle for the Abyss. Where to start? This book is bad. It's kind of a side plot about an ensemble cast trying to stop the World Bearer's mega space fortress, but it reads like a bad action movie, and it commits one of my cardinal sins for HORUS Heresy books. All the characters feel exactly like their 40k versions. There's a comedy drunken Viking space wolf, a by-the-book ultramarine, and a mustache-twirling word-bearer villain, because all the work that would be done to make those legions believable in future novels just wasn't there yet. Thankfully, it doesn't add much to the overall plot, so you can skip it. 1 destroyed Death Star. Next Next up is Mechanicum by Graham McNeill. Again, another book some people dislike, but I thought was good. It introduces us to all the bonkers craziness of the Mechanicum on Mars, shows us how the Knights work, has some really good human characters, and because it predates this kit, we even get proper old-fashioned terrifying Skitarii. I like it for space robots. And closing out the first 10 is the first short story anthology. There's going to be a lot of these coming up. This one is Tales of Heresy. There are some dodgy ones in this. The Dark Angels and Space Wolves shorts aren't amazing, but it's redeemed by some brilliant world building. Like Blood Games about Terra and the Custodes, or The Last Church set at the very end of the Unification Wars. For Migu. With Book 11, Fallen Angels by Mike Lee, we return to the Dark Angels. Same two aspirants as before, but now they're Astartes and therefore just way less interesting. One of them gets the sort of plot that becomes really common around now, capture some sort of super weapon to win the war, and the other gets involved with the whole Fallen Angels arc as that starts to kick off. Yeah, I mean, it's not as interesting as the last one. Two generic super weapons. Book 12 is 1,000 Suns by Graham McNeill, and it's the intro story for, well, the 1,000 Suns. Like Legion, this fleshes out their culture, has brilliant point of view characters, and paints a picture of a complex, interesting force. It generally does a really good job of setting up that the whole 1,000 Suns arc is a tragedy. For Space Wizards. Nemesis by James Swallow is next, and this is a bit of an odd one. There's two storylines here. One follows a group of Imperial assassins sent to kill Horus, but apart from a few interesting new assassin types, it's a bit of a clunky story that feels more at home in 40k. And the second storyline is a murder mystery about a demon assassin on the other side. Honestly, the second one, with its look at civilian life in the heresy, is the more interesting one, but neither really fit. Two raging Eversers. Aaron Dembski-Bowden's first novel in the series is The First Heretic, Book 14. And this is one of the best ones, a proper introduction to the word bearers and just why exactly they're so pissed off. It does a really good job of rationalizing them and pulling them away from the cartoon villain stereotype of their earlier appearances. Four Priests Are Praying. Next, Dan Abnett returns with Prospero Burns and the grand reimagining of the Space Wolves to something just less silly than they were before. This book is great. It's the counterpart to 1,000 Suns, and it's told from the point of view of a human historian, so we get loads of interesting stuff from the Unification Wars too. The Space Wolves come out of this really well. They become one of the more relatable legions. 5 Wet Leopards. A short pause again for another anthology. There's a few boring ones in Age of Darkness, but overall it's a pretty good collection of shorts that show the effect this war is having on the wider galaxy. Highlights are probably The Iron Within and Forgotten Sons by Nick Kime, and that's the last good review he's getting this video. 3 Irons Within. Book 17 is The Outcast Dead by Graham McNeill, and it's another contentious one because it contains a pretty big timeline error. But that aside, I really like it. We get to learn about the Astra Telepathica, a bit more about Terra outside the palace, and there are Thunder Warriors in it. 4 Space Japans. Next up, we've got Deliverance Lost by Gav Thorpe, concentrating on the most emo of the legions, the Raven Guard. The Raven Guard are one of those legions that are a bit overlooked by this series. Their characters aren't great, they don't really have a very well-developed backstory or culture, even their human buddies are a bit boring. This book concentrates on point-of-view character CORAX the Primarch, trying to play scientist, hothousing Astartes regiments, and then giving them terrible, terrible names. Not my favourite one sad mutant. And we're back to Dan Abnett next with No Fear, where he pulls off actually making the Ultramarines interesting. Seriously, they come out of it less as poster boys and more of a really sensible, well-rounded force. Plus, the narrative structure of this with the constantly ticking mark of CALTH is great. Oh, it's about the Battle of CALTH, where the word bearers ambush the Ultramarines. 5 Roman tax returns. And then we're at book 20, which is another anthology. The Primarchs is a series of 4 novellas, and this would be later developed into a proper series, but this book isn't great. Turns out Fulgrim's arrogant, Ferrus Manus was a dick, the Dark Angels don't know what side they're on, and the Alpha Legion seem to have lost their plot. Yeah, skip it. 1 Dorian Gray. Book 21 is Fear to Tread by James Swallow, and it's the Blood Angels' big intro novel, but it suffers a bit from being written by the same person who writes the Blood Angels in 40k. As such, they're kind of exactly the same as their 40k counterparts, and I just don't find them very interesting as a 30k legion. Also, for my money, there are no good human characters and Sanguinius is in it way too much. 2 Paradises Lost. Right, we're almost halfway through now, and it starts to feel like Black Library are padding it out because we get a lot of anthologies. Shadows of Treachery, though, is one of the good ones. It's all previously released material, but of the 7 stories in this, 6 of them are amazing. We get the classic limited edition Dark King and the Lightning Tower, the Caban Machine from the old Collective Visions book, and Prince of Crows about Sevatar. It's just marred by another Raven Guard short story in there. 4 killer robots. Okay, it feels a bit late to be doing Legion introduction novels, but Graham McNeil's Angel Exterminatus is actually pretty good. The plot is a bit silly, and there are some very silly set pieces, but the Iron Warriors as a Legion are really interesting. They're one of those Legions that actually benefits from being similar to its 40k counterpart, and this is one of those books that ties in really well. 3 Olympic Rings. Speaking of late Legion intros, book 24 is Aaron Dembski-Bowden's Betrayer, dealing with the World Eaters and the Word Bearers rampaging through Ultramar. But really, this is the World Eaters book, and they are beautifully written. They're one of the most human and misunderstood Legions out there. It's even got some really good human characters. 5 Red Hands. Book 25 is another anthology, but Mark of CALTH is exclusively concerned with the fallout from the Battle of CALTH, so Ultramarines and Wordbearers. Yeah, it's fine. Nothing amazing, though I do like the one that's told entirely from the point of view of an Anathane dagger. 3 Cranky Servitors. Okay, it's the lizard in the room. Here we go. Book 26 is Vulcan Lives by Nick Kime. Every Salamanders novel in this series is getting together 1 star, and it's a sleepy one. They're just written identically to their 40k counterparts. All the characters are exactly the same, the plots are really similar, and there's just too much Vulcan. All the Salamanders novels together are just a bit boring for me. 1 collective star, and we're going to gloss over the rest. The Unremembered Empire is book 27, and this is the only Dan Abnett book in here I have any complaints about. We're meant to be halfway through a colossal galaxy-spanning civil war, and yet Gilliman, Johnson, Sanguinius, Kurz, and Vulcan all end up on the same planet doing essentially a superhero movie. It seems silly, it's got Primarch point of view all over it, and it's just not what I want at this point in the series. 2 Avengers. Thankfully, book 28 is the brilliant Scars by Chris Wright, and it's just really good at this point to hear about one of the nice Legions for a bit. This jumps back in time and covers the White Scars' entry into the war, and though it feels, again, a bit late, it's really, really good. Also, the 1 human character in it is awesome. 5 Space Bikes. Vengeful Spirit tells the story of the Battle of Molech, something that didn't really come up before this series, but is actually really important. The main plotline just rounds up a load of spare characters and sends them off to infiltrate Horus's battle barge, and it's fine. But other plotlines in this, like the Fall of House Divine, are brilliant, and there's some really interesting plot revelations. 3 Vengeful Spirits. The Damnation of PYTHOS is number 30. Remember this one? Nah, because it's pointless. Some Iron Hands and Salamanders do a horror movie away from the main plot. It feels like a random 40k novel stuffed in here, or the sort of thing that maybe should have been a short. I don't know why this is a major novel in the series. Skip it. 1 Dinosaur. Legacies of Betrayal is 31, and it's another anthology, only this time it's almost all filler. Brotherhood of the Storm is the standout one here, that's the prequel to Scars, but the rest are a bit middling. It's also got Kryptos in it, one of the major plot points in the Sisypheum arc, a sort of collection of shorts about a Mary Sue ninja, his grumpy mate, and their crew of stereotypes. I really dislike this whole arc of short stories. I'd say give them a miss, and just because of that I'm giving the book 2 boredoms. Book 32 is an easy one, Salamander's novel, been there, read it before, gave it a score. War Without End is another anthology, mostly of really short stories. It's actually got some interesting backstory for some of the Molech characters from Vengeful Spirit. Yeah, it's fine. 3 dragged out YouTube videos. PHAROS is book 34, and it's about a space lighthouse, and it follows directly on from Unremembered Endgame superhero punch-up. It also suffers from the same Primarch point of view problems as that book did, though in this the focus shifts more towards the regular Astartes, so it isn't quite as pronounced. Remember when humans were in this series? 3 Sou'westers. Things aren't really great in the mid-30s because Eye of Terror is another collection of basically filler short stories. It's slightly better than the last one, I guess. Iron Corpses, Brotherhood of the Moon, and Aaron DB's Aurelian novella are probably the standouts here, but otherwise 2 fillers. Things are looking up at 36 though, with Chris Wright's Path of Heaven, the sequel to Scars, and we finally get a glimpse of the end of this series as the story starts to turn towards Terra. Path of Heaven has some great moments with the Emperor's Children and weaves the Scars nicely into the wider plot. 4 Dragon Helmets. And then another anthology. It's getting a bit silly at this point, they're almost every other book. But The Silent War is actually a really nice little collection, looking at some of the easy to miss details of the war. I think the Sigillite is probably my favourite in here. 3 Phosphex clouds. Angels of Caliban by Gav Thorpe catches up with the Dark Angels after that whole awkward Avengers arc, and now they're over at Sotha and fighting the Night Lords. It's okay, but for me it's still got too many Primarchs in it, and it feels like filler at this point. It kind of feels like Black Library are just checking off the plot points. 3 Hearts of Darkness. So, after a disappointing 30s, Praetorian of Dawn is actually a breath of fresh air. The Alpha Legion are the first to attack the solar system itself, and the Imperial Fists have to defend it. It's the first good Alpha Legion story since Legion. It really pulls the focus back towards Terra. There are some big revelations, and John French even manages to write Alpharius and Dawn as point of view characters, and it works. Yeah. 4 Chainsaws. Another anthology, sort of, at book 40. CORAX is a collection of all of Gav Thorpe's Raven Guard shorts and novellas. The Raven Guards still don't really feel as well developed as the other legions though. 2 big birds. And then book 41 is Master of Mankind by Aaron Dembski-Bowden, and it's another one of those standout novels, dealing with the disastrous collapse of the Emperor's Webway project, which kind of hasn't been mentioned until this point. There's some really nice characters in this, including the brilliantly written Arcan Land, and the book digs into some juicy background about the Emperor without going as far as making him a main character. It's one of the best novels in the series. 5 Robo-Monkeys. On to 42, Garrow, which is another collection of previous novellas and shorts by James Swallow, but this time it's been edited and expanded to run like a full novel. It's up to you if by this point you find Nathaniel Garrow an interesting character or not. I tend to find him a bit redundant, but it's fine. 3 Shouting Bald Guys. And 43 is another anthology. Shattered Legions is a collection of shorts about the guerrilla campaign waged in the wake of the Drop Site Massacre all the way back in book 5. Mostly it's about Iron Hands, again one of those legions that don't really get the development some other legions do. Some of the elements in this are really interesting, but we can't get through a book like this without including the bloody Sisypheum and its Saturday morning cartoon of a cast. 3 Bionic Bits. The Crimson King by Graham McNeill follows on from the events of A Thousand Suns, as Ahriman, his space wizard buddies, and a few short story characters picked up along the way try to find all the bits of Magnus. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the sort of Vision Quest plotline when someone goes into a psychic trance in 40k, and A Thousand Suns managed to be pretty light on those, but this book is full of them. Again, I'm not sure it's that necessary. 3 Shards of Magnus. Book 45 is TALLARN. This is another collection of novellas, this time by John French, but this collection is really good. I think the TALLARN story should have been the Iron Warriors' big intro, but instead this follows the human Imperial Army forces on the recently irradiated planet of TALLARN come to terms with the loss of their world and figure out how to fight sealed inside armoured vehicles. It's claustrophobic and intense and really, really good. 4.5 evil black obelisks. Okay, 9 books left, and to be honest, none of them are that great, so let's just get through them. 46 is RUINSTORM. Guilliman, Sanguinius, and the Lion finally quit Ultramar and try and get to Terra, but it suffers from the same problem as their previous novels, plus added vision quests. 2 Warp Storms. 47 is Old Earth, another Salamanders novel. Yeah, there's some interesting pre-Imperial stuff in there, but not interesting enough to redeem it. No stars. 48 is Burden of Loyalty, another anthology, this time with a heavy focus on Mechanicum and a few of the weirder forces involved in the war. It's okay, 3 Psi Titans. And next up is Wolfsbane. Following on from Vengeful Spirit, Liman Russ decides he's got to go and attack Horus himself because, well, otherwise he'll be on Terra, and we know he's not meant to be at this point. It's fine, and it's nice to see some old characters, but it's a bit unnecessary, and it feels like it's only really there to move people around. 3 more Wet Leopards. And what way to celebrate 50 novels than by skipping straight through Born of Flame? Sorry Salamanders, no stars. 51 is Slaves to Darkness, because Games Workshop just don't seem to have enough names. This is like the flip side of Ruinstorm. Liman Russ poked Horus with a spear in Wolfsbane, and now the rest of the traitor Primarchs have to hold it all together before they go and attack Terra. By this point, you're just urging them to get to the siege already. 3 more deployment phases. And 52 is the last anthology, Heralds of the Siege, which is more moving people around and sort of just rolling in all the stuff that hasn't found its way to an anthology yet. 3 ticking clocks, and we're on to Guy Haley's Titan Death. Probably the best of the latter books. Titan Death deals with the giant Titan battle on Beta Garmon, the last defense before Horus reaches the solar system. I think it's hard to get stories about Titans right in 40k. There have been some really good examples and some bad ones. This is one of the better ones. Plus, it's one of the few later novels to have interesting human cultures and characters. I liked it. 4 stompy robots. And finally, the last book of the series is The Buried Dagger by James Swallow. It's kind of a strange choice, an origin story for the Death Guard mixed in with how they turn to Nurgle in the Warp. It's fine, but it's a strange plotline to end the series with. I would have thought the events of Titan Death or even Praetorian of Dawn would have made more sense. Anyway, people have been waiting ages for this bit to be covered, and this book does a decent job of covering it. 3.5 friendly beasts. And that's it. 54 books. The Horus Heresy series started amazingly well, and there are some brilliant books throughout, even at the latter end, but by about halfway through it really gets bogged down in side characters, reprints, and underwhelming stories. By the last third, there's a lot of filler with some gems shining through. However, almost every book in the series adds something to the overall plot, and there's a nice sense of achievement from getting through it all. It's followed by the Siege of Terra series, which I haven't covered here because at time of recording it's still happening. And I also haven't done the PRIMARCHS novellas. Those are maybe for another video. If you want to get into the Horus Heresy, I'd still say the first 4 books are a great introduction to the universe. And after that, it's up to you how far you dig in. Who knows, maybe you'll even like Battle for the Abyss. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.